want that, don't you? We'll work it in, I can tell, I know you're
What?
we can do
That's gonna be so cool if you can do that in like within an hour. What's the point of that?
That's more than one.
I've always had water, coal, and fluid that lends them all.
How do we put that into words?
Oh, it does? Well, I think if it brings up images of meat and stuff. Okay, well, what's another word? It's supported by water. Foundational. What did we say? So water, air, and then earth.
Raw light and water.
She said they sold
Raw light and water.
what's another word for raw? She has that.
Raw light.
Guys, high five. So what is it? Just down water.
Okay, team, 3 minutes left. 3 minutes left before we get the tweets of the year.
We have to be a marketing team. We want positivity, not well, the problem with unrefined too is that a lot of people want to be refined. Refined in the sense that culture, educated, make money. Well, the problem with capitalism is that you don't tell them their entire life.
Well, no, we have to discuss that.
We just started.
I mean, it
Hey, you guys got it? Hey, team, 1 more minute. A quick game is a good game.
the other one was water and effort connection.
seconds before the Jeopardy music starts. I have that. All right, 10, 9, 8. Is everyone done? Okay. Then now, let's hear them. Who would like to go first? Who has the first tweet? What table? Okay, cool. I'm going to just remind from yesterday, our practice now is standing, intro, and then go.
Hi, I'm Andrea, and our tweet is water and air, the foundations of all connections.
Awesome. Okay, next.
Okay, that's on the. Good morning, everybody. So we have the tweet is each one of us is a playful drop of water in an ocean that is an infinite cycle of beginnings and ends. Hashtag bluemind. Hashtag monitor.
Hey, nice job.
Great. Okay. Good morning. I'm Vicky. We hashtag. We're Twitter experts. Hashtag. Water's in us, around us, connects us. Let it flow. Did you feel that? Hashtag Blue Marble. Hashtag Holy Ned. Hashtag we do. Hashtag Blue Mind. Hashtag make the world a playground. Hashtag play. Hashtag permission to fail. Hashtag take them to the water.
Wow. Nice. All right. Table right here.
We have the same thing.
Ditto.
Life starts in water, is nourished and enriched by water. We have the hashtag the Blue Mind, the hashtag the movie. Just add water and see where you can go.
Nice. Awesome. Is that easy, difficult?
Difficult.
Fun? Difficult? Playful? It's often hard to take kind of big amounts of information and condense it down to what's critically important. And so this is kind of a tool you can use. It doesn't always have to be in a tweet. People might get annoyed if you speak in tweets all the time. But thinking about how you start to condense and distill down kind of the wisdom you're deriving from each day and from this whole experience. So far in our journey, we've covered birth, death, and play of the ages. And today we're really going to step into the lover and the fighter, which are two really cool ages that we're going to focus on this morning and this afternoon. And so to give you a little more context, I'll bring our agenda out for the day, our handy dandy flip chart. So kicking off this morning, we're going to start mainly with the lover. So we're going to hear from someone that's been with you all week, Allie, which is awesome, for about 15 minutes. And then we have some very special guests over here from Heartwired. And so they're going to be joining us a little bit later this morning and have an interview with Jay as well. This afternoon, we're going to go into the fighter with Van, who some of you met last night at dinner. And then we'll have our kind of water activity either in the rain or in the sun, yet to be known this afternoon, to kind of really immerse that and bring it all home. Sound good? Any questions on today? Okay, cool. So one quick thing, did anyone leave this at the aquarium? Perfect. You got it. Okay, and with that, I would like...
Say just a
Yep.
few words. So we're going through the 7 ages of water, and we bookended birth and death. You know, that those would be the bookends. Decided, as you recall, to put death up front, which makes perfect sense from Diane's perspective. And then so we went through play, but now we're into the 3 middle ages that I refer to as the lover, the fighter, and the justice. And those are the big adult kind of years, really. So just kind of keep that in mind. So in birth and play at the beginning, ebb and flow and death at the end, but in this middle part, it's sort of as, you know, young and maturing adults, the lover, the fighter, and the justice. So those are the 3 kind of big middle ages, just to kind of give you that overview there. And Allie's going to put on a little video to loop of her work there.
Yeah, and while Allie's doing that, Jay, it would be great to have you maybe come up and introduce Allie. I mean, some of you have had the opportunity to meet her. She's been with us for the last 2 days, but it would be great to get kind of a deeper intro of her.
Yeah, so each of the ages, we've invited people from a variety of backgrounds. We have scientists, we have practitioners, we have artists, water lovers of various kinds, and Allie Rogers is going to help us sort of launch into this idea of the lover. And her work is as a filmmaker, as a water woman. She connects movement and art through her, well, you can go to her website, pranalens.com, and see a whole wide range of videos that she's produced. She works for business clients, outdoor product clients, as well as individuals and couples and families in making, whether it's wedding videos or promotional videos. She works for yoga companies, and so she kind of brings water into everything she does. That's why we are friends, and one of the reasons. And she could have sat down here and spoken about any of the 7 ages, I believe, or all of them. But in looking through her work, I thought, you know what? Let's talk about the lover, and let's talk about romance, and let's talk about how we fall in love with water and how we fall in love with each other. So that's what we're going to talk about with Allie. So you can kind of see some of that footage as we go. But thank you, Allie, for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we check in with our camera team, sound team. We're going to clap together. So I do write down pranalens.com, and you can, prana, P-R-A-N-A,
Yep.
L-E-N-S.com, and then you can go and check out more of the videos that she's made. You'll see all kinds of water: lakes, rivers, oceans, forests, surfing, cold water, surfing warm water, lots of different people interacting with their water in beautiful ways. Good? Okay. On the count of 3, let's clap.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. You're all welcome to join us when we clap. By the way, there's just a simple slate to mark the sound. So, Allie, thank you for joining us at the Blue Mind workshop here in Monterey. I want to start out, as we do, and ask you a simple question, which is, what's your water? What's that water that you first connected with, that you fell in love with, that comes to mind? That simple question.
I grew up in Minnesota, so I was always around lakes, but the moment that when you ask that question, what I think of is always in New Zealand. I remember getting picked up from the airport, and the next day we were driving the coast, came around the bend, and just saw these roaring waves and a rugged, long, wide open coast and cliff sides, and something deep within me just like both exploded and sunk in, and I just couldn't. I hadn't have my friend pull over. I was like, we have to go and just sit and watch this. And for years, that was my experience. Anytime I would drive along a coast, I was probably not a very fun person to travel with, because I was always like, I don't want to do whatever we're doing. I want to go there. So yeah.
So you are a water woman from the lakes and rivers of Minnesota to the oceans of the world that you continue to explore. And one of the things we were talking about earlier is the idea that through your art, or artists in general, that feeling of being in love with the water and that feeling of awe and wonder that makes your heart skip a beat, or makes you pull over and just stop and change your plans for the day, maybe change your plans for your life. That feeling, you make it portable. You make that feeling of awe and that love of water portable through your camera. Some people make it portable through music. Some people make it portable through painting or through words. But that's your job, is to capture that and then share it with more people. Right?
Definitely.
Kind of feel like that's what it feels like you're doing to me. But
Yeah.
how does it feel like to you?
Yeah. for a long time, it was just, I would just do it because I had to. Like all these projects that you might see on, well, not all of them, a lot of the projects on my website were just, I call them spirit-driven projects. There was something moving in me that needed to come out, and like, or I saw something and I needed to capture it and put a certain story to it. And then certain brands and other people started to catch on and wanted that kind of feeling for what they're trying to get people to tap into. And it's always getting people to tap into that feeling, that love that they have for what they're doing, where they are, who they're with. And so, yeah, it always feels, for me, like my love and passion being expressed visually.
And so we talk about the 7 Ages of Water, and we're talking about the lover. The lover is about falling in love with ourselves. It's about falling in love with our place, with our watery place. And it's about falling in love with each other. And it's about falling in love with ideas. And that we then fight for all of that. We fight to protect and restore all of that. You work with, obviously, all of these waters, but you work with couples who are desiring to make a commitment to each other and express their love. And you've seen the role of water in that, in their lives and in their ceremony. Let's talk about that a little bit. How do you see the lover in this watery context through that romantic lens?
Yeah. It always seems with the couples that I know that like to celebrate by the water or choose to, that it's their way of kind of not pushing everyone out, but having their own moment to themselves. Yeah. They like to be able to just look forward out at the water. It usually has a special significance to them, the place. Like, for example, one of my wedding videos up on Lake Superior, the groom proposed to the bride there. It's their family cottage that dates back decades upon decades. So there's all these wonderful memories and emotions that they have with this space, but then sharing it with people coming in from all over the country. They wanted to share their love of place with everyone alongside their commitment and their love to each other. And it's both this way of them being able to have this special space to themselves and kind of have that quiet moment amidst all the celebrating and all the people and all of the outward. It's their kind of time to go inward when they're there. That's what I've noticed the most.
Yeah, the water seems to set a stage for romance and connection that is, I'm not going to say better or worse, but it's different than when we're not by the water. Nature can do that in general, but something about the water that sets us up for it's a more sensuous experience, a more romantic, more connected experience. And even if we're alone, right? So whether we're together with others or alone, it sets us up for ceremony, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I feel like it gives this feeling of expansiveness. When you look out at a great body of water, you feel that great expansiveness within yourself and with your other person, or whether you're by yourself. We're looking outward, we're into the future together, or you're connecting to, if you believe in God or spirit or anything, kind of, it's a really quick way to tap into that source, I think, when you can look out and nothing else is distracting you. It's just that great expansiveness.
Yeah. And that all works as long as that water is happy and healthy water, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking out on the expanse
True.
and it's like, oh, oil rig, oh, oil spill, oh, there's some plastic washing up,
Yeah.
there's a dead fish, that romance kind of goes out the window a little bit there.
Definitely.
Kind of fades a little. I always think, when I think of water and romance, I think of that scene in Titanic when young Leo and his sweetie are up on the bow of the ship, and they're it's very romantic, right? Obviously, that story has a not such romantic ending, I guess you could say, sort of tragic, but that context, that blockbuster film, that watery context, just if that played a role, the water plays such a maybe a supporting actress role in that Academy Award-winning film.
Oh, for
Should
sure.
have gone to the North Atlantic, perhaps. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So let's just go big. And what's your your audacious vision or in your wildest dreams, of thinking about your work, thinking about in the Blue Mind context, wave your magic wand, and where does that go? What is your dream for the world or for the future? And go big.
Yeah, well, this week is actually getting me to think a lot more about the world and other people. For a long time, my greatest dream is just that I can be by the ocean. I can be in water all the time, but thinking in a broader scale about how this can impact others and my work. And I think at the core of it, it's just that I always want people to tap into that spirit within themselves. And to me, it's always, water has been the best, the quickest, the most essential way to do that. And I can tell by the impact that the draw that my work has to certain people, that it'll touch the right people, it'll draw the right people. And whether that means everybody in the world needs to find themselves at a coast, I don't know. But I think that hopefully it'll just get people to tap into that love and that spirit within themselves, wherever they are. Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you for your beautiful work and for sharing your love of water so effectively, and I look forward to future collaborations with you.
Me too.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Guys, so as we think about that theme of kind of romance and the lover, I want you to take out something that you may still have from yesterday and you may need an extra, but your blue marble. Does everyone have their blue marble with them?
I gave mine away already.
Good, there's an extra right there for you. So I want you to take a blue marble or take out your blue marble and hold it in front of you. So something we've talked a lot about over the last few days are emotions.
Quickly, huh?
And that emotions don't always play a role in our day-to-day, fact-based, database living. And I want you to take this idea of love. And I want you to take your blue marble and find somebody in the room, anyone, and I want to tell them what you love. And I want you to start the sentence with I love and give them your blue marble. And then I want you to tell them why you love that thing or that place or that person more than anything else. So take your time, take your blue marble, find someone in the room. What do you love? I love ... and why you love that thing. So get up, find someone new, blue marble in hand, exchange them when you're done, and sit back down. Please go to it.
Doesn't have to be one true.
Bobby. grab your seat.
I used to have these but I think the place is
So,
So I would love to hear what you love or what you heard from someone else that they loved more than anything else. So what did you share, or what did you hear, or kind of a lot? You love it a lot. What did you? Yeah, Terry. I heard. Can I get you to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Hi, I'm Terry, and I heard from Sam a very heartfelt dedication to the water. His first memory of the water is going out on his father's shoulders in the ocean and watching his dad enjoy the water. And now he goes on his own on a voyage down to Big Sur and camps overnight and surfs and fishes and just wades in the water and kind of communes with the Big Sur coastline.
Awesome. Thank you. What else did you hear, or what else did someone share with you? Yeah, Paul.
I'm Paul. So Jody and I both shared kind of the same thing when we got to talking about it, and we were just looking at our water.
Yeah.
And one of the things we love is after exertion or a hot day or a workout, your body, you can feel it, and then you take a moment and you have that cold water, maybe with ice, and it's pouring down your inside of your body and restoring it, and that feeling, and I just love that. We both love that, and we don't think about it, but what that does, it feels good in your body, and
you
we're
gotta do
thankful
it
for
to
that.
survive, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else have something that they shared or that they heard from someone that they want to share? Jackie?
So I'm Jackie, and one of the things when you kind of got me scared when you said, the one thing you love the most. I was like, oh no. But I couldn't really pinpoint it. But I think it just comes down to I love travel, and I love the expansiveness of travel, and that sense of being a world citizen, and having that constant in my life.
Thank you. So we got to hear from Allie kind of how she uses that love of water and film to capture these moments. And you got to see some of those, which were really cool. And I'm very excited to intro our next guests, who are Robert Perez and Amy Simon. They've been collaborating together for over a decade. And really, kind of what struck me, I had the opportunity to have lunch with Robert a couple weeks ago, and I swear I wanted to kept trying to ask questions to keep it going because it was so interesting to me. But really what they're doing is positive social change in action. They are taking that emotional side and tying it to why people do the things they do. Why do they make decisions the way that they make them? And so we have a really interesting session with them, and I'll have Jay introduce them in a little bit more detail, but thrilled to have you guys both here, and thank you for joining us.
So I think you probably recall in your education and perhaps in the serious meetings that you've attended throughout your life and your career, that's very rare to hear your professor, the lecturer, or the convener of these serious meetings use the word love in public. When a scientist does that, you can be assured that you will receive a room full of eyeball rolls at the very least. And if you've never been at the front of the room, when a room full of people rolls their eyes at the same time, it's really creepy. It sounds like a banana slug fest or something. It's like the slimy sound of eyeball. No, just kind of kidding. But there is a certain cynicism that pervades the way we approach seriously solving big problems that often precludes emotion. And that's part of the reason why we do what we do, and that's the reason why Robert and Amy do what they do. They're like, as you say, really down in the trenches and in the weeds of the data, the information, the front line, the politicking, the real nitty-gritty details of changing the world for good. And what they have learned, and you can read all about in their amazing new report just came out 2 months ago. 2 months ago?
April.
April, okay,
Of
last year, last April. Fantastic report that approaches the emotional connection that we have to these big problems that we need to solve, kind of fearlessly, but in a science-based way. And brings in psychology and neuroscience and insight into our brains. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But in the context of the lover, so we fall in love with places, we fall in love with each other, but we also fall in love with ideas. And we fall in love with ideas like justice, and we fall in love with the future. And then we go to work, right, for those places, for those people, for those ideas. We fight. And so today is all about the lover and the fighter, and I really don't think there's a better couple of people in the world to lead us through this phase. So you've got copies of the report. There's a whole box of them that Robert and Amy generously brought. So let's dig in. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
We're going to do this thing we do is we count to 3 and then we clap. So when Bobby says he's ready.
All 3 of us are going to clap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Or everybody, if you have, okay,
All
all
of
of
us
us.
are going to clap. All right.
This way.
This is the clunky part of
Yes,
words
yes,
and
yes.
This is where everyone becomes really comfortable with silence.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
We're very comfortable with silence.
I use silence in my research a lot because I have to sit and let a group be silent and wait until someone's ready to speak,
Right.
not
Right.
jump in to fill the silence.
Yeah. You ready? No? Little extra adjusting because we're a trio.
Yes,
rather than a
yes.
duo.
I know, and I feel bad because I don't want my back to be to this whole table, so I'm trying to
Is
pivot
everybody
here.
good? Okay. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Wow, that was excellent.
Loud.
Best one so far. All right. So Robert and Amy, thank you for
Thanks for having us.
joining us
Thank
at the
you.
Blue Mind workshop here in Monterey. We always start out with a simple question that gets a little personal quickly about what's your water and what's that water maybe that you first fell in love with. You know, what's your water story, or the first thing that comes to mind. So start with Robert.
Yeah, I appreciate in Blue Mind you talk about sacred spaces, and my husband and I often jokingly talk about our respective sacred spaces. And mine is a redwood forest with a slow-moving creek moving through it, and it just reminds me of I grew up in the desert. People now know probably Indio from the Coachella Music Festival. No one knew what that was when I was growing up, but to escape the heat, we used to travel up to Idlewild to a campground called Herky Creek, and it seemed so different than where I grew up, which was just sand and lots of sand. And it was cooler, and it was refreshing, and it was a pleasant assault on the senses. I just always vividly looked forward to it every year and vividly remembered the memories for that. So for me, it's a creek in a redwood forest. Yeah.
Very nice. Oh, yeah.
So for me, it's Cape Cod. So my grandparents honeymoon there, my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my kids, we all still go there, 4th generation, goes there every summer together. And I grew up spending summers there, and it was just absolutely a formative experience. Ocean and bay and sailing and swimming and rowing and clamming and fishing and cleaning the fish that you caught and eating them, and the family time, and just all of that experience has just profoundly shaped the rest of my life.
Yeah. So right at this very moment, I feel like I've just you painted both of you the multi-sensory picture of the redwood forest with the creek in Cape Cod, and I as a kid spent a lot of time in Cape Cod, and I live in a redwood forest by a creek. So I'm feeling really good right now.
Excellent. Good.
Thank you.
Yes.
So that's really what part of what your work is about, is how to engage people more deeply in, and we have been through a stage in our communication and our strategizing and our leadership that unfortunately encouraged leaving all of that part out, right? And so what's happening is you're leading this effort to bring it back in and say, look, your emotions are important. They are a biological part of who you are, and let's use our understanding of our emotions as a force for good. Your organization is called Wonder. The name is Wonder,
Yep.
which is part of what we're talking about, the wonder of the natural world. And so taking that emotion and marrying it with data, information, insight, and then bringing that forward is what you're all about. But let's first start talking, before we dive into the water, let's talk about the precursors to your work on water-related topics and some of the campaigns that you've worked on that have been world-changing, really, and successful. So either of you want to start with some of the background?
Why don't you kick us off? And one of the things we always tell folks,
Yes.
so we've worked closely with each other for 10 years. We've known each other for 25 years.
Yes.
We're work spouses.
Yes.
And so we interrupt each other like real spouses. So just flagging that
Yes.
we're not fighting. We're just being ourselves. Why don't you kick us off on maybe marriage?
Yeah, so we are researchers and communication experts, and our purpose for the work we do is to create social change. And that's very, very important for us. We're not doing work for academic purposes, not to dismiss academia, but our work is intended to be put to work and not to sit on a library shelf. So we started, a lot of the work that we did that is known in terms of really generating changes around same-sex marriage and working to help make that something that is now legal across the country and increasingly around the world. And we really learned from that work and work that had preceded it and work that is less well known, that in order to create behavior change, in order for people to be able to vote to allow same-sex couples to marry, we first had to change their attitudes, which everybody knows who tries to create change. But we realized that to change their attitudes, we actually had to change the way they felt about things. We had to change their emotions. And we couldn't change their emotions unless we understood more about what we call the 5 hardwired factors, which are emotions, but also identity, morals, and beliefs, and lived experiences. So we had to go back to our audiences and really understand what were they bringing to marriage, and what were they bringing to this, so that we could help them have a different emotional reaction to the topic than the one they had.
And those insights, walk me through sort of a, I'm going to say typical, but let's bring it down to the level of one person and what their opinions and how through these kinds of conversations that has changed. When we had a conversation about this, and the one spiritual religious context plays a big part. And as you begin to unpack that, for each person, there's this new set of insights that helps people find agreement on an issue that seemed so contentious, but then all of a sudden that contentiousness melts away.
Well, talk about internal conflict.
Yeah, well, in one, internal conflict is a big thing. When we're in focus groups, in fact, the folks that are in focus groups are not the extremes. They're not, I'm completely opposed or I'm completely supportive. They're usually saying things like, well, on one hand, I know lesbian and gay people. On the other hand, I was taught in my faith that this is wrong and this is a sin and I worry about it. So in Heartwired, we write about an in-depth interview with a couple that Amy did, a husband and wife couple. And the husband has a sister who is a lesbian, and he was supportive of the issue, somewhat supportive. The wife loved her sister-in-law, but was somewhat opposed. So Amy comes to do what we call a dyad interview, which is how pairs of people shape each other's opinions. And so Amy's talking to the wife and asking these questions, just saying all these incredibly supportive things about why she loves her lesbian sister-in-law, how important the gay and lesbian people are in her life. And Amy looks at the woman and says, I'm so sorry, did we make a mistake when we recruited you? You seem to be so supportive of this issue. And she stopped, you tell the rest of the story because it was you were there.
She paused and she said, her eyes just got wide, and then she started crying, and she said, I want to be supportive of this, but I just can't be, because essentially she was afraid of being damned. And so her identity as a Christian, her values as a Christian, were in such conflict with her lived experience of her sister-in-law and other young lesbian people who were really important in her life. And she was trying to weigh them out, and she came out more in her Christian identity and her Christian values than in the other secular experiences she had to be opposed. So we learned that we had to help people who had a strong Christian identity to be able to weigh within themselves competing sets of Christian values. Because when it was the Christian identity at war with a secular lived experience, the Christian identity went out too often. But when we made it be about, when we helped people experience it within themselves as being about, am I the kind of Christian who loves and welcomes and who's inclusive and who experiences Jesus' love as all-encompassing, or am I the kind of Christian who's judgmental and shunning, then they could come and be supportive of us within that internal identity.
I will also just say that the notion that a progressive movement would talk about an issue not completely in secular terms, but would actually make the religious case for why a Christian or other people of faith should be supportive of marriage for same-sex couples, that was transformative.
Yeah, and uncomfortable.
And deeply
and
uncomfortable.
maybe even uncomfortable here right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And we'll talk more about the fact that we're testing, based on what we learned, we're testing how to use faith-based, whether they're spiritual or actually religious, themes and messages in the ocean work that we're now actually involved in.
Yeah, so this all is going down in the context of a lot of work that's been done to put us in boxes, and a lot of effort that has been focused on divisiveness and really strengthening these positions that may really, in each of us, not make sense. And so you talk about this individual person who's wrestling with these trade-offs, and here's my life, here's my family member, and then here's my faith, and I've got conflict, and I've got to make decisions, and then you've got the movement is not even comfortable even using the word religion or even talking about faith, and so we get in these jams, and so this is so relevant to this conversation, this global conversation about water, the environment in general, but we're here to talk about water in particular, and the connection through every faith, every spiritual tradition, every religion has a water core, a water story, has fundamental water ceremonies. Every single one. I mean, there's a quote that says, if I had to start a religion from scratch, I would begin with water as just the starting point. That makes so much sense because it is the source of life, but it's all this other stuff. And yet our movement, our blue movement, has really tiptoed not only around the topics of emotion, but anything related to spirituality is kind of, it's the third rail. I guess the third and fourth rails would be spirituality and emotion. Just don't touch it. And it's worse than eyeball rolling that you will receive if you do. So let's go there. Let's kind of take your very important and tested approach, and then let's dive into the water topic. So do that.
I'll start.
Yeah,
okay,
please.
so in order for us to create social change, we have to understand these 5 factors: the identity, the beliefs, the values, lived experience, and emotions of our audiences. And our audience isn't monolithic. Our audience is different, and that's different for every kind of person. So one of the things that we have to dig into that, and we have to dig into it in the US for people who are white, for people who are black, for people who are Latino, for people who are Asian Pacific Islander, because their culture, their relationship, their history, it's not going to be the same around water any more than it would be the same for all different kinds of people. So we tend to have, in the US, as researchers and change agents, we tend to focus on sort of white people as like the main thing, and then if you have extra budget, you'll go in and research other audiences. And we think that's fundamentally flawed as an approach, because we need to understand, I use the ice cream analogy, that all ice cream is cream and ice and salt, but there's a lot of flavors, and you need to know what are the core ingredients that everybody shares around water, what's the brain science, what are the core things, but then what are all the flavors? Because we can't get inside and help people change and help people act differently through feeling differently unless we understand all their flavors. So we really take that research approach, and tied to that is helping our advocates understand how different they typically are from the audiences who they're trying to engage. And that self-awareness is very difficult for advocates often to engage in, especially when they're scientists.
I'll just add that I worked at a conservation organization almost 2 decades ago, and at that point in time, the challenge that organization was looking at, it was a membership organization, and they looked at their membership roles and they saw 2 things. Our members are overwhelmingly white and they're very gray. Yeah. They are like getting older and older, and this is a recipe for extinction for an organization. So they wanted to figure out how to deepen it, yet they weren't, to Amy's point, figuring out how to actually talk in very diverse terms about why people love the ocean. I helped to facilitate a board meeting for a global environmental NGO, and it was on one of the topic we were talking about at that moment in time was climate change, and what could be done to talk about climate change in a different way. And a board member, when we were having this conversation, a board member said, "Oh, no, we're doing a great job of talking about climate change. It's just that people aren't listening." And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. And this is actually a shared attitude, that we're doing everything right. It's just the problem and the fault of our audiences for not. And we actually fundamentally flip the script on that. We see it as our responsibility to figure out how do we talk about this in a way that is aligned with how people are hardwired on an issue. And our research on the ocean is showing that among African Americans and Latinos, there's deep love of the ocean. Oftentimes it is family-based. Oftentimes it's deeply religious. We have heard deeply moving stories of African American women going to the beach to commune with God and to find a quiet place to play and to feel like God is actually listening to her at the beach. But those stories aren't actually reflected in the ways in which conservation organizations or movements talk about this issue.
Not at all. I mean, so rare that those kinds of stories come through and are heard. And we tend to rely on what I call the first 3 E's: the ecological arguments, the economic arguments, and even a little bit educational arguments. That the ocean's a good classroom. The ocean gives us is a driver of our economy, and it gives us biodiversity, and it has a role in sort of the overall management of the planet. But the 4th E, the emotion, is if not absent, really hard to locate in the rhetoric and the reports, certainly at the conferences. And so you've done a brilliant job taking the momentum from a variety of issues that you've worked on, bringing it to the blue conversation. Let's talk about the barriers, the challenges, the pushback, the eyeball rolling, and because I think if we're going to be successful in moving forward, we need to understand what really is the source of the pushback. Right? There's some institutional inertia. It's just this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. You're challenging that, but I think it's deeper than that. I think there's another level to that pushback that we best understand.
There's a long history of Western thought that privileges thinking and intellect and facts and information over emotion and actively distrust emotion. And science is based on that. Let's not go by what we feel. Let's go by what we can see, what we can measure, what's measurable. And it is interesting because a lot of the work we do is with advocates, but it's with scientists oftentimes. And they have a very hard time acknowledging the role of emotion in decision making. And it's one of the things that a lot of the newer neuroscience is so helpful in, because we can start to make a science-based case, an evidence-based case for the role of emotion in decision making. so that we can get more support for doing research in that way and communicating in that way. But it is uphill because there's so much skepticism just about qualitative research and emotions and feelings and talking, and how do you measure that and its impact. And it's an ongoing challenge.
We often talk about the change that we do and the challenge and the barriers that we face. And when we talk about our audiences, we say it's not that they won't change, it's that they cannot change. So in reading Blue Mind, when I came across the story that you told of Jamal surfing out in the ocean, and he has that split-second moment where he sees something move in the wave, and it's a fin, and he just starts swimming for life, gets to the shore, and then looks out and realizes it was like a pod of dolphins. Yeah. And one of the things that you said that I thought was so on point was, it didn't matter. He had to get to shore because he needed to stay alive, and his fight or flight instincts kicked in. Mind. Yeah. It's very similar for tough social issues. It's not that people don't want to change, it's that they cannot change because emotions and the ways that they're hardwired on an issue make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to do unless we actually figure out what the conflict is and help them to manage that conflict. And that's not just true for the people whose minds we're trying to change, our audiences, voters. It's true for advocates as well, because advocates have amygdalas as well, which is another thing we often say.
Yes.
And they are
I think we all do.
They are hardwired in a certain way, and they will ask questions like, you want us to go out and talk about religion to our members who are deeply secular? And we're like, well, you shouldn't talk about it if those aren't your values, but you should actually feature messengers and the stories of people who are spiritual or religious talking about, if you actually want to truly diversify
if
your
you want
movement.
to expand, you have to change what you're doing, because if you do the same thing, you're going to end up with the same results. 70% of Americans identify as Christian. We would want some of them to get engaged in this work, and there are a lot of people who aren't identified as Christian but do identify as spiritual in some way. We want them to get engaged in this work. And if those are some of the main things that motivate them and that define their emotional space and their identity, and we're putting that aside and saying that it's verboten and you cannot address or speak to people in those terms, you're just missing this tremendous opportunity to engage with people.
Massive, and not just missing it, but slapping it down.
Yes.
Which is, isn't just a sort of a benign neglect, but it's an active, maybe even aggressive takedown of the way where people are coming from.
Yes.
We often.
And I just want to build on what Robert was saying. We really see it as our responsibility to equip people to be able to change. That it's not on them, well, they just have to listen more, understand more, or whatever. It's actually on us. If we want to create change, we literally have to equip people, and we can't equip them if we don't understand what their life experiences are so that we can meet them within their own life experiences.
Sometimes when I talk about bringing neuroscience to advocacy and to conservation, what people say is, oh, you're going to do neuromarketing on us or on them. So you're going to use these scientific insights to manipulate people. Yes. And I understand where they're coming from. And my response is, no, this is done with transparency. So the Heartwired report is available for free online. I want you to know everything we know about your brain. So there's this idea that I think is fundamental to this entire conversation, which is neuroliteracy. So if you understand your emotions better than the marketers, better than the politicians, you're empowered, and you start to see, wow, the way I feel about the people I love, the way I feel about the water I love, is really important to me, and I'm starting to understand really how important it is to my well-being, and the way I feel about justice, and the way I feel about our future. I'm understanding my biases better. I'm beginning to be empowered by my own neuroliteracy. That, I think, is very different than neuromarketing, which is by nature manipulative. The neuromarketer doesn't want the public to know they even exist. But Coca-Cola has a neuroscience lab going to help them sell Coca-Cola. They don't want you to know that, but they will use it to make better ads, with whether it's Santa Claus, polar bears, or whatever they decide is going to be the character bringing the Coca-Cola to you. Not to hammer on Coca-Cola per se, but they're they do have neuroscientists helping them sell
Yes.
sugar water.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because human beings have an amazing and tragic ability to be fearful, to be mean-spirited, to be hateful, and they also have an amazing capacity to be loving and caring and generous. And we see our work fundamentally as focused on allowing people to have access to the better angels of their nature in a way that actually resolves the conflict. We are in focus groups a lot where people are crying and are tortured over these tough decisions. They want to do the right thing, but as we mentioned, there's something about how they were hardwired on an issue, a deeply held belief or a value or a conflict that's preventing them from doing it. So they're sitting in this state of torture, going on one hand, on the other hand, and we're working with them to help resolve that so they can be the good people that we all aspire to be.
Well, I want to ask a sort of an open-ended sort of, it's the question I like to end on with everyone, which is, in your wildest dreams, in the context of sort of Blue Mind meets Heartwired, in this water conversation, in your wildest dreams, so there's no budgetary constraints, there's no reality constraints, this is just big audacious dreaming. Where do you see this going? Just take us there on this dream ride.
Oh, we unpack our tribal identities so that we can have a shared experience of humanity. And when we have that shared experience of humanity, then everybody is inside our tent of caring, instead of some people being inside and other people being outside. We can then we can be our better angels in so many more instances when we have everybody inside our own tent, inside our own tribe. And also when we aren't experiencing a sense of scarcity, but when we're operating from a sense of abundance, the whole world is transformed.
Wow.
There's my magic wand.
Yeah. So I would say one of my favorite stories that you shared in Blue Mind was the story of the work that you did in Baja California around sea turtles being on the brink of extinction. And I was so, we called it a journey story. When you have someone who used to think one way, this is the only way, my livelihood is built around being a fisher and getting sea turtles and using them to make money, and then having this sort of epiphany moment of realizing, not because someone persuaded them or tricked them or manipulated them, because they looked to the future and said, I want this to be something that is sustainable and that my own children can do themselves. It's a beautiful story, and I want other examples of that across the globe where people are able to exercise their own agency in a way that allows them to both thrive as human beings, but along with them thriving as human beings, allowing our earth and our waters to thrive as well.
100% in agreement with both of your dreams. To that sea turtle story, I remember I was in Baja with an economist from the National Marine Fisheries Service, from NOAA, and he just could not understand why these fishermen were saving sea turtles. He kept saying, how much are you paying them to save the turtles? And I said, that's not it. That is not it.
It's a great story. You actually conducted Heartwired research. What you said was, rather than talk to them and tell them what to do, we listened to them and we understood how they saw themselves, what their sense of identity was. And so our research really begins with what we call deep listening.
Yes.
We don't talk at them, we listen to them. And then we hear the stories that they tell, and then we use stories and narrative and messaging strategies that have proven to be effective to align with how people are hardwired on an issue.
So needless to say, when I learned about your work and read Heartwired, I was literally jumping up and down.
And we actually were saying the same about your book.
When we read your book.
We were like, why didn't we read this book a year and a half ago when we started our ocean research project?
Yeah, and hence here we are. And so I think we've all benefited from this conversation. And I want to take a little bit. We have about 5 minutes, I think, on our schedule. We'll come back.
We're gonna give more than 5 minutes if possible.
For Q&A?
Yeah,
Okay.
a quick time for you guys to recap, and then
I defer to Morgan.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sure there's lots of questions.
All right. So I will do sort of for at least the camera. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
And Amy.
Thank
We
you.
enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Jay.
We're seeing some really, really rich dialogue and some awesome ideas, and I want to be able to give you the opportunity to ask some questions if you guys are going to be available. I know we have a bit of time. So what I want you to do as we prepare for that is at your tables, just sync up, because there was a lot of interesting information that came out of this. Number one, what are your top 3 headlines that you heard at your table? And start to think about what questions do you have? We're going to give you the opportunity to ask some questions, but what questions might have come up for you during this? And what were your top 3 headlines from listening to Robert and Amy? So I'm going to give you kind of 4 minutes to sync up on that, and then we'll do some Q&A. And you,
Don't try to change somebody's way of viewing. I know. No, I don't think we have to. Disregard who they are.
Is this the first time that you've done the live streaming for one of your sessions?
We've live streamed
Okay.
but
Sometimes so much of our worldview structure is built on top of it, like Jenga, you know, boy, you pull that out, it's awful. I like that concept because there's so much conversation about target audience. No, I mean, a lot of that's kind of what I got. That's very narrow. That's not you change the message. It's wrong. Right. You change the message. Either multiple target audiences or everybody's a target audience.
Most information is corporation.
How important is it for them to generate a specific language that they use when they try to create some change? Words that are
One of the questions I
or maybe it's like,
I recognize that, and that's.
maybe you don't do a headline for everybody, but you adjust for and you're thinking what questions the
All of the all other research. Kind of community in the target.
on the west.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Every time it's like, so, you know, if you're talking with code, right, but if you high school athlete, then you know that when you're trying to increase the sensitivity and appreciation for what that actually sounds like, you would do it differently. You're addressing parents who are either overhearing
Okay, team, please start to wrap up. Please start to wrap up. Would love to hear, what were your top three? What were your top three headlines? Top three headlines from what you heard. Yeah.
I didn't hear it, but I read it. This seems to kind of synthesize the whole thing. The culture we're in right now especially, being asked to understand an opposing point of view can feel like you are validating that. And I was thinking today, why does everyone feel so warm and nice to relative strangers? And I think because we built our premise that we have shared values. And there's something about knowing that I know that something in her is a shared value. So there's an instant affinity just based on that knowledge. So I thought that was kind of a...
Can you stand up so we can applaud for you? Thanks, Terry. What else? What else did you hear? What else stood out? Yeah.
Just consider your, Jose Carlos, consider your target audience correctly. You know, focus on something.
Yeah.
On the content.
What else?
I guess just, Kaylee, just to kind of make sure that yourself is full so you can operate with abundance is a good way to be a steward of anything that you're trying to talk about with
Anything else or anything different that you want to add? Anything else? Yeah.
I was struck by so much.
I get you stand.
It was, a half hour of headlines. Oh, I'm sorry, Jody. But I wanted to say several times, I became aware of how threatening an idea can feel for people. And not sound threatening or anything like that, but you feel it. You get the physical, kind of reaction. So that was very moving. You put that threat in an emotional context, and I had the image of a Jenga, if somebody has an idea and they pull, and you have your whole worldview sitting on top of this idea and somebody threatens it, you really just need to appreciate what you're proposing and what you're doing to somebody, sometimes just talking or presenting an idea.
Hi, Sabah. Yeah, thank you for everything you shared. I actually, throughout the week, have been holding, that something is missing, and through the conversations, and appreciate just the acknowledgement of other perspectives, other cultures, and that's often my experience in dominant culture spaces. And if you think about global perspectives, the global majority are people with very different backgrounds than what often gets prioritized as like the one way. So I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Hi, Shelley. We also talked about deep listening, and there's a lot of effort that goes into bracketing one's own perspectives as a researcher to just gather that information and separate that from what the outcomes will be. So kudos to you for that.
So we're going to open it up for about 20 minutes of Q&A. So whatever questions you guys might have, raise your hand, Jay will call, and we'll get Amy and Robert to address them.
Thank you. I was hoping, the applause thing, if it happens, is gonna really be uncomfortable for me.
That's why we do it.
No. So my name's Megan, and I believe it's Amy. I'm wondering, and I think a lot of people here are wondering, if you would mind restating again your dream, because it was very fast and perfect, and a lot of us were just scrambling to write quickly on that.
I don't know if I can restate it precisely the way that I did, because that was spontaneous. But so I'm going to answer it in a more expansive way. So there's a lot of work in social science around moral foundations, and it's worth taking 19 minutes out of your life to watch a TED Talk by Jonathan Haidt,
H-A-I-D-T.
H-A-I-D-T, from 2009, where he talks about moral foundations. And he's written this wonderful book called The Righteous Mind, How Politics and Religion Divide People. It's dense reading, so go with the TED Talk and then get into the book. But one of the things that he talks about these 5 universal moral foundations, There's care and harm in the fact that we want to care for people around us and not harm them. There's fairness and reciprocity, that we want to treat people fairly and we want to be treated fairly. There's hierarchy and tradition, respect, and it's earned respect. It's like respect you feel for a teacher or your parents or a minister. It's not forced respect. It's and how important that is in a culture. And then there's also sanctity and degradation, and this is a very big thing we experience. And liberals tend to put our moral foundations, our weight on care and harm and fairness and reciprocity, and we don't build on, or we think we don't build on, hierarchy and respect and on sanctity and degradation. But these moral foundations are universal in all of us. They manifest differently. So conservatives will manifest around sanctity and degradation with sex, and what we put into our bodies sexually is very emotional and will trigger their amygdalas. But for liberals, it's around food. Think about GMOs and organic and how many of you are vegetarian or vegan, and it's around things like vaccinations and whether we vaccinate our children or not. It's the same moral foundation, but it's a different manifestation. The bridge in between, the fifth moral foundation I haven't talked about, is tribalism and in-group and out-group. And so what I see, which is a little bit different than how he talks about it, or a lot different, but what we see in our work is that when somebody is in your tribe, these moral foundations have great weight. You want to care and not harm for someone who's in your tribe. You want to treat them fairly and they want to treat you fairly. But when someone is not in your tribe, these things don't have great moral weight anymore, and we can act very badly and not feel the kind of guilt that we should feel or the shame we should feel internally because we've acted badly. Our better angels don't win when someone's outside our tribe. So for me, the big challenge in the world, literally in the world, is how we expand our sense of humanity and make everybody inside our tribe, because then all of those positive moral motivations have so much more weight in our behavior and our conduct. So that's my vision, is around that.
Thank you. I'm Jackie. Thank you for your talk. It was awesome. So much of it resonated with the work that we do. And my question is, because this is where I'm at, and I really would love to talk to you, but I want to find out more about the work you do at the ocean. And then my apologies, I have to step out for a second at 11:30. I have an interview with a South African radio station. And then after that, I'll seriously be here. I'm going to throw my phone in the ocean. But anyway, so I want to find out more about the work that you're doing. And I have come to this point. I'm part of a coalition, and we're having a real difficult time at this stage. And I'm sure you're probably finding this. And I'm trying to get people around, basically come together around the straw issue. And it's proving to be getting viral. But where I'm at is, and I've been talking to them, that we really need to bring in more of the religious thing. I'm reading this book, Originals, and one of the things they talk about, the suffrage movement, the thing that really put it over the top and really got it together, there's all this division that I'm seeing that's happening in our realm right now in advocacy and activism. And it was the temperance movement. And I think we need something like that for the environment, because I just keep coming back to that, our moral values and stuff. It's like, being stewards of the earth and bringing those values up, because I see that there's a huge disconnect there. So if you can speak more to that and some of the work you're doing with the ocean.
Sure, I'll kick us off, and this is where you'll see a lot of us both of us going back and forth. So the Packard Foundation approached us, and they said, we want you to do for the ocean what you've done on so many other tough social issues like marriage, understanding what it means to be transgender, medical aid in dying for people who are terminally ill. And so we're in the midst of a 3-year research project to understand how to harness people's affinity and love, deep love for the ocean, and understand how to translate that into action. And so where we find ourselves right now is we're in what we call the mindset phase of research, which we talk about in Heartwired. And that is understanding how essentially people are hardwired on an issue, what are their emotions relative to the ocean, how does identity influence and shape how they think about the ocean. When we talk about identity, we say, we often say we have multiple identities, and our psychologist colleagues, like that's multiple personality disorder. You don't have multiple identities. You have one identity and multiple facets. I'm a small business owner. I'm a person of color. I'm Latino. I am gay. I'm a spouse. I am a son. I am a conservationist. I am a friend. I'm a colleague. And so we try to understand how people's sense of identity, we're trying to understand how people's sense of identity is shaping how and why they love the ocean, and the values that they hold, the beliefs that they have about the ocean. One of the things that we're seeing in our research is out of sight, out of mind. If you can't see it, then it's not an issue. And therefore, the things that people tend to care about are, I see lots of litter on the beach. So that's the thing that people want to focus on, because that's the thing that they can see. Or when we did focus groups with Latinos in Houston, they talked about, when I used to go to Galveston 20 years ago, it was a great place to take, for the family to be, but now it's so polluted. They're actually seeing and smelling and understanding how it's changed. So we're going through this process of understanding how people first are heart-wired. What are their mindsets relative to the ocean? And then the next phase would be, okay, so now that we know that, what will it take to actually persuade them to take action? What stories do we need to tell? How much do you use visuals, because this is an all senses kind of issue to be connected with. And so that's the yet to come part, but we're in the midst of the understanding people's mindset piece. And
are you guys here, located here?
we're both in the Bay Area. Amy's firm, Goodwin Simon Strategic Research, is in Oakland, and my firm is in San Francisco. But we are also,
we do a lot of work nationally and internationally
and
as
globally
well.
too.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up on the out of sight, out of mind. That in the ocean world, you will find, you hear, that's been one of our favorite excuses, that why people are not responding the way we would hope. You know, so you have marine ecologists saying everybody should care, not everybody cares, and so the answer for many decades has been that out of sight, out of mind. And I think of that basically every environmental or social issue that's really ever been successfully addressed is mostly out of sight of most people. So it's kind of a lame excuse to use.
It is.
Whether it's rainforests or same-sex marriage or any issue that you're working on, many people are not seeing it, but it's still being solved, and there's still advancement. So that just triggered that little.
I just want to build on that a little bit and say that, we are hired to change our audiences, but in reality, a lot of the work we have to do is have our advocates do some self-reflection and change some of their own assumptions that they bring to their work. So one of the things that we're hearing a lot from our advocates as we share back the findings that we're having in the mindset phase is, well, we don't want to just focus on the beach because that's not the ocean. We want people to care about the ocean. And the idea that you couldn't use the beach as an entry point to getting people engaged to act on the ocean it's a tension point for them. And then similarly, around cruises, we're finding that a lot of people's only interaction with the ocean is on a cruise. And so how do you build on that? That is real. It's their lived experience. It's a huge worldwide industry, and it's a potential opportunity for engagement. What do we do with that?
And what we do is we vilify cruise lines.
That's right.
And we don't even want to say the word cruise ship.
Yes.
And even that's sort of the mainstream ocean movement is kind of like evil cruise ships that's not engaged. If you got funding from them, why did you do that? In that, so there's that tension as well, which is part of this process.
I think one of the things we have seen on the big global issues of the day, and this doesn't always work, but one antidote to the out of sight, out of mind is to take the old adage, think globally, act locally. The way that we flip that is to think globally, message locally. And so if one of the things is people they can't handle it. It's just too big. It's too vast. Mm-hmm. But how do you take what's happening in South Florida around climate change and how much flooding is happening there to make South Floridians care about climate change and to make it real. And in the work that we've done, when we've made it local, it helps people to feel more connected and realize that it deeply affects them. So we look for little approaches like that to help basically break down what are the barriers that prevent people from taking action.
I have a question about from your research, maybe what strategies you found most helpful for, I guess, like balancing between the individual capacity for impact, but then also acknowledging like the systemic and collective like issues that we all face, like whether it's from industry or government or forces that they're there that not always talked about, or then if they brought up, it's like I feel like a glass kind of people get glossed over or don't want to go there because it's overwhelming. And sometimes I think our culture focuses on individualistic like stuff and doesn't really see the systemic like side to things.
It's a really great question. So I am of an age where I came up in politics through the nuclear freeze movement, and nuclear annihilation was so big and so scary that a lot of people didn't act and felt they were powerless to act because it was about international companies, it was about the international governments. It was not something an individual person could do. And then the nuclear freeze movement grew out of this intense need of some people to do something about it because it was too scary. A lot of people, when they get scared, shut down. And so the question is, how do you help people take some kind of an individual action that makes them able to manage their own anxiety, their own fear, enough that they can then act more or act to make a difference at a policy level or bigger level? And I think climate change in some ways is very similar, that the danger and the fear is so great that people don't know how to get in and they don't know how to do anything about it. They don't know how they can make a difference, so they just don't do anything at all. And so our movements, I think, need to understand that at the human level, we need to manage the anxiety, and we do that by doing something. And then when someone can manage the anxiety, they can do more. So the individual level actions play a really important role when you understand human beings and how we shut down in the face of things that feel overwhelming.
Well, yes, and that makes me also think of the difficulty to have those conversations when the othering happens, like too, when it's someone, of a different experience or idea. But it doesn't address like the barriers to accessing water, let's say, to bring it back to water. And not everyone can access the beach or pools, and that I feel like there's an interconnection between all of that, and in this country alone, we don't always talk about that, or some of the policies that have been in existence and still are that, kind of create a separation and difference in experience.
And I see there are a lot of perceptual barriers that are, dividing us, that are not easier or harder to overcome, but there are walls, literally. There are gates. There are locked doors. There are all the physical barriers. There are the pollution barriers that are another kind of physical barriers.
Yeah.
But then there's the perceptual barriers, and that's also part of what this work in the Blue Mind context, at least, is trying to melt down some of those perceptual barriers where people say, well, I'm not allowed to access this water. In parts of the world, because I'm female, I'm not allowed to surf. But what if you do? What will happen? And, that's a little scary conversation. Well, let's find out. And maybe those perceptual barriers are, in fact, dangerous, and maybe they're just in our heads. And so there's some of that part of it as well, as what this work addresses is that perceptual barrier. Maybe I read something in this sacred book, I interpreted it this way, and what if I interpreted it this way? How would that shift the way I think about this issue? Fascinating stuff, yeah.
I just want to come back to one. You can help people understand things like implicit bias or structural racism or other kinds of really important concepts, but you can't start at the conceptual level because they can't connect and identify. You have to start at a smaller level and then that illustrates something and then help them see. So a lot of it is not that it's not possible, but it's how you sequence it in terms of the communications.
This might be a little naive, but if you're on the ground and you're going to have a conversation with someone of what you believe to be an opposing viewpoint, have you developed a completely neutral, non-alarming, non-threatening phrase to open the conversation?
On what topic?
Something that the brain doesn't interpret as threatening, and then they immediately kick in the resistance. I mean, how do you, I'm trying to bend culture at the company I am at, and it's just really a one-on-one to change their mind, and I don't want them to entrench, and I'm already sort of have a label of having a certain belief system, so how can I open that conversation with them in a way that doesn't appear to be trying to coerce them into my point of view? How do you start that?
One way to think about it is shift the use of the word conversation and make it plural to conversations. That's one. Because we tend to think, I just need this magic formula and I'm going to have the one conversation and it's going to be transformative. But I'll go back to the sea turtle story from Blue Mind. I don't imagine that change happened because you had one conversation. If you read that anecdote, what Jay and others did is they actually listened and understood how people were hardwired on the issue. What was their sense of identity? Before any talking happened, listening was the place where he started. He actually went out and went out on efforts to catch turtles. It sounds as if you actually ate turtle, which was probably maybe difficult for you to do.
Yeah.
And yet I imagine was an incredibly important trust building moment. And so listening for how people are hardwired, what are their stories, how do they describe their deeply held values. We call that listening for the Venn diagram. And sometimes that overlap of that Venn diagram is just the slightest, smallest little sliver. But where do your values align with the values of your target audience? And looking for those opportunities to create those bridges. Whereas if you start with a conversation, what you're likely to do is to say, I have 15 minutes to change this person's mind. And rather than listen, you're more likely to talk. Last thing I will say is Daniel Pink has a book called To Sell is Human. And he talks about that the conventional wisdom on who is most successful at selling are extroverts, right? Because extroverts are bigger than life. They can talk a good talk. And then introverts are quiet and they're withdrawn. And he comes up with a third category, and it's actually how I actually see myself. And I was like, yes, that is who I am. And he calls them ambiverts. And ambiverts, like ambidextrous. You're an ambivert. And the ambivert is the most successful at selling ideas because they have an amazing capacity. Number one, unlike introverts, they can actually say, here's why I think this is important. They're able to articulate the issue, but they start with listening. Extroverts tend to care mostly about talking, about filling up the space. And then you're missing incredible opportunities to listen and understand what motivates people, why might they actually be willing to change. And the thing that's most important is to understand that you have to be willing to allow them to change on their own terms and based on their own values, not your values. So the last little thing, and I'll turn it over to Amy if she has something to add. There's a great anecdote about stopping an additional runway being built into SFO. Lots of delays. Environmentalists were really concerned, conservationists were really concerned that this was going to be a slam dunk. Everyone who lives in the Bay Area has experienced a delay because of the fog in San Francisco. And so environmentalists said, let's do some research. Let's do some research to figure out how to stop it because there are these little frogs that we want to save. And so the research company does the research. They come back and they say to the environmentalists, we have great news. We have figured out how to completely kill this runway expansion. And the environmentalists say, tell us, how do we stop it? And they say, you just need to go out and talk about how much more traffic it's going to create around SFO. Traffic is a killer. It's a non-starter. You will kill this. It'll be dead on arrival. And the environmentalist, rather than saying this is great news, they just slumped in their chairs And they looked at the researchers and they said, but we want people to do it for the frogs. So the reality is, we don't just want to change people's minds, we want to change people's value systems. We want them to, not just to agree with our position, we want them to agree with our position for the same reasons that we see it, the ways that we are hardwired. And if you're going to be effective, you need to listen for the Venn diagram and understand that people are going to change not because of the reasons that you think this is an important issue, but because of the reasons in which their identity, values, lived experiences, beliefs, and emotions shape how they think about an issue.
I just want to add, it's really important, I think, we tend to think of our audiences as a subject that we're going to act on, an object that we're going to act on, right? And we also tend to think of them as a barrier to the change that we want. But I think instead we have to think of them as a genuine partner and an actor who has self-determination and has their own valid point of view, even though it's different than ours. And if we can engage with them respectfully and really listen and understand their point of view and not just see the interactions we're having with them as transactional, but as a genuine two-way, I'm going to listen, I really want to understand this person's point of view. When I understand their point of view, then I can see how we might be able to work together for something instead of this person is in my way and I have to change them so they're not in my way anymore.
Well, you just looked right through me. I mean, I'm so guilty of any resistance. And I'm like up on my high horse. I'm working hard on staying neutral in my body language and everything, but I still don't quite know how to ask, how do I say to you, tell me how you feel about X without front loading it? You know, even if you say, why do you believe that? There's a certain immediate defensiveness about that. I don't really understand quite how to start the conversation in a way that he's not going to feel prejudged.
We are not allowed to use the word why. In our research, it is banished. There's very few words that are banished, but we're not allowed to ask someone why, because if I ask you, why do you feel that way? Why'd you do that? You're like, oh, my mother asked me why I did that when I was a child, and it always meant I was in trouble. Right? But you want to ask people, tell me more about how you feel. Tell me, what are the main reasons behind? What are the experiences that inform how you feel?
Okay.
Tell me, tell me, tell me. I want to understand.
Just more questions. What's the benefit? Why has it helped you? That kind of thing. Just stay as neutral as possible.
What concerns you about this? What do you see as the good outcomes if this happens? What do you see as the bad outcomes?
That's good.
Very open questions.
And listening with empathy is incredibly important, and genuine curiosity.
Yes.
Genuine curiosity.
Do we have time for one more question or two quick questions?
I would just add on to the turtle story. There are conversations that are underway that are 20-year-long conversations. They're still happening without a conclusion or an answer, and that's very different than the cultural context in the nonprofit world, which is campaigns.
Yep.
Campaigns have a start and an end and a goal.
That's right.
And maybe, if you're lucky, some funding for that period of time. And they tend to be a year, maybe two funding cycles. And now you're in that box. If you're coming at a conversation in campaign mode, people feel it. They're like, whoa, I feel where you're trying to take this question, it doesn't feel good. And that's very different than movement mode. And movement mode can be decadal and often is even longer than that.
That's a good way to
so
think
it's
about
a very different perspective. So an organization, a campaign, and a movement are three very different things. And so without getting deeper into that.
There was a question over, yeah.
I don't know if this is necessarily a question, but it's kind of going through deep listening and active listening, which I'm trying to do a lot better and taking to what I do. Especially coming from a place where you're not talking about what you're doing at all to people telling you need to talk about this, you need to talk about this, and then you kind of over talk. And I'm trying to find that balance. And so maybe I'm trying to capture what the last couple of questions were, like turning individuals into a piece of the movement and how they feel they're part of it and change. And not kind of just positive persistence. Like, I had a lot of people when I was doing swim lessons, people like, oh, I want to swim. And they have I know they have fears around it, but they cancel. But I know, all right, and it's okay. Next time, so for next time, they see, oh, what's that you got? It's a bike. Oh, okay, well, I think I can do that. Can I come? Yeah, of course. You've always been welcome to come. And so it's not being obviously I'll get a bit offended. stood me up. I'm like, the pool, like, well, you know, but at the end of the day, I'm just like, the pool, like, not the worst, you know? But then keep staying persistent before you know it, they're like, wow, now I'm really a part of it. And then it's like, yeah, now you're helping me because now I have a full class. So it's, you know, 4 people now. I'm in another everything much better, and you've gotten this, and, you know, and so that's something I learned, not being offended by people, not being able to take that step, because there's a lot of deep stuff that they're probably not telling you, but you can kind of see them and just listen to them, and just staying persistent with just the message, like you're saying. It doesn't have to be about the frogs. Let's make it look like it's about traffic, because more people will get on board with us, and then at a later time, push for the frogs.
Yes.
'Cause that's still the
Yes.
Enough, Paul, I think, did you have one last question?
That's all right.
Okay.
So I'll just maybe throw this out as just maybe a final thought. Amy and I will often talk about the fact that the people that we're working against, the people who are opponents, have a one-step psychological process. All they need to do is trigger anger, fear, anxiety, tell people that your livelihood and the livelihood of your future sons and daughters is going to be abolished. We have a 2-step psychological process. We first need to calm the downstairs brain where the amygdala is, where fear reigns supreme, so that they can manage that flood of negative emotions. And then once it's never going to go away. Fear is a good thing. Fear keeps us alive. It keeps us not getting gobbled up by sharks. But it manifests in a way that makes it possible for people to have access to the better angels of our nature. So step 1 is to calm the fear. And then step 2, it sounds like what you're doing, is to actually allow them to have access to the better angels of the nature, to end on a positive note. Oprah got such snaps for the speech that she gave at the Golden Globes, not because she steered clear of naming the very real issue that's facing women around sexual harassment and sexual violence. She did, but she also understands the power of storytelling, and most importantly, she understands the power and the psychology of hope and how to leverage it. And if we only focus on fear, we lose, because people will shut down. We need to let people know what's at stake, but then ultimately we need to end with something that's hopeful, positive, and possible.
Amen.
Thank you so much for your time and for joining us and for doing the Q&A. It was really amazing.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for everything.
We're actually going to head out just on a short break. I'm going to give you 16 minutes. So back in the room at 11:01, I have one ask though. For those of you that didn't sign up that still want to, kayaking is open, and we also have 7 extra passes to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So if you didn't get enough time or you want more time there and you haven't signed up for something else, please come see me at the break. I also need 2 volunteers that signed up for Refuge that would be willing to drive. So if you can come see me at the break, back in the room at 11:01, I will see you shortly. Thank you.